Good afternoon, and welcome to the Federal Railroad Administration's Federal-State Partnership for Intercity Passenger Rail Grant Program Information Session, Major Capital Projects. Before we begin, I'd like to take you through the items you see on your screen. The PowerPoint presentation for the webinar appears in the top left window of your dashboard. If you have problems viewing the presentation slides, ensure you are not using a web browser to view the webinar. If you are, exit the webinar, download the Adobe Connect desktop application, and re-enter the webinar through the Adobe Connect desktop application. In the Troubleshooting Tips pod, at the bottom left of your dashboard are some internet network, video, and audio troubleshooting steps to ensure that participants can both hear and see the presentation. Next to the Troubleshooting Tips pod is the Web Links pod, which contains links to the useful resources related to the Federal-State Partnership Program. To view the web links, double-click the title of the link. At the bottom right of the Adobe Connect dashboard is a Technical Support pod. This is where you can ask our support team questions about any technical issues you're having. Above the Technical Support pod is the Questions for Presenters pod for the questions and answers session. This is where you can ask questions that will be answered during the Q&A portion of today's presentation. Thank you to all of you who submitted pre-webinar questions. Please note that a recording of today's presentation will be uploaded to FRA's website in about a week. The presentation file will be available about 24 hours from now. Before the presentation begins, I would like to review the webinar format. We will start with a brief welcome and then launch into the presentation. Following the presentation portion of the webinar, we will have a question and answer session during which FRA will address your pre-webinar questions and those posted in the Questions for Presenters pod. And now, I'd like to hand the presentation over to Ryan Arbuckle, Transportation Industry Analyst at the Federal Railroad Administration.
Good morning for everyone on the West Coast, and good afternoon for those joining us from the East Coast. Thank you for joining us today. We're here to talk about the Federal-State Partnership for Intercity Passenger Rail Program. This webinar is going to focus on three kind of main topics that we'll kind of go through in a minute. But joined with me today is my colleague Miriam, and between the two of us, we're going to present the information and kind of hopefully be able to answer some of the questions that you may have. So without further ado, let's jump on in. So as I said, we're going to talk about three main topic areas today. The first is going to be just an overview of the recently published capital project guidance that FRA published a draft version of it back in June, July of last year and finalized it earlier this month. So we're going to kind of go through some of the public comments that we talked about or that we received back in June and July, talk briefly about some key definitions, look at the project lifecycle stages, which is a key component of the overall capital project guidance, and talk about some next steps that we have with that guidance. Then we'll jump into some letters of intent, phase funding agreements. Just to level set expectations with this, we're really going to try and explain what the statute and how FRA is approaching it at a very, very high level. So just bear with us on that. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of questions pertaining to the letters of intent and phase funding agreements and how FRA is planning to put those into practice. Unfortunately, we're probably not going to be able to answer too much detail on that, but please feel free to ask the questions, and to the extent we can, we will provide an answer. And then we'll kind of round off with some information on domestic sourcing plans that are not a requirement of at time of application under Fed-State Partnership Program. However, we're strongly encouraging those entities who intend to seek a Buy America waiver to start considering those efforts, and we'll talk a little bit more about those, what that all entails later on. So again, let's start off with an overview of the capital project guidance. So as I said, we published this mid-year last year, a draft version of it, received some comments on it and addressed those comments, and took those comments back and revised the guidance to take those into account. The guidance is available both on the Federal Register within the docket and on FRA's website. and we encourage project sponsors that are going to either have a major capital project, which we'll get into the definition of what that is, or just really any project sponsor to kind of look over the guidance as it's intended to be a tool to help get projects to completion with a couple different requirements and documents that'll help kind of guide us towards that. So like I said, we received about 9 comments from different entities that we're not going to go over comment by comment here, but within the notice that we published in the Federal Register, we do detail out our responses and how, or the comments that we received, and how we incorporated or responded to those comments as we finalized the guidance. So those interested in kind of seeing how that process and how the public comments received informed the final guidance are encouraged to kind of go read the notice. The guidance is included within the docket on the Federal Register. So if you go to the Federal Register and look at the notice, on the right-hand side, you'll see the docket, and the link to the actual guidance document is there. Alternatively, it is also located on FRA's website. So just a couple definitions that I wanted to highlight here that are pretty key to the guidance and kind of will help us manage some of the conversation we'll have today in terms of LOI and PFAs. The first is the major project. So you'll note here too that you'll see a little asterisk. We will also refer to major projects as major capital projects. They are, for the most part, interchangeable terms in the context of what we're talking about today. But keep in mind that the major project definition is housed within the capital project guidance, and the major capital project definition is housed within the Fed-State Partnership NOFOs, both the national and the NEC versions of those NOFOs. So I just want to try and avoid a little bit of confusion. For the most part, when we're referring to major projects, we are using the term interchangeable with major capital projects, again, within the confines of what we're talking about today. Keep in mind, again, that we are talking about the Fed-State Partnership Program and not any of the other discretionary grant programs that FRA has. So a major project, in terms of the guidance, is a railroad capital project and has a little bit of cost thresholds associated with it. So $500 million, the total capital cost estimate needs to equal or be greater than $500 million, and there needs to be at least $100 million in federal assistance to be defined by the guidance as a major project. Alternatively, FRA does reserve the right to put the definition of a major project on a project based on the complexity or the the relationships that have to be brought together to help the project succeed. So this is not a punitive action, but more so, again, trying to get the projects to be to success. The guidance, as you see with the last 3 definitions, helps outline different documents to narrow the scope, make sure that the project is able to be safely delivered on time, within budget, and high quality, and also helps to provide financial plans that reflect the scope of the project. And again, this is a combination of taking lessons learned over the last couple of years, as well as working with our sister modes of FTA and FHWA to kind of bring together all of those elements so that we can leverage the success of what those other agencies have done, as well as try and help projects, again, get to success and achieve their intended goal, which is finishing the project on time without minimizing cost overruns. So, I'm sure people here have seen this slide in multitudes of times. It's a graphic that we here at FRA love to use for the project life cycles. It really breaks down how a project moves through the life cycle stages as it goes from systems planning into final operation and maintenance. This is a huge element of the capital project guidance. So we just kind of wanted to bring it back up here just to kind of highlight this once again, that you will see within the capital project guidance, each section is more or less broken down to kind of help explain the actions and the deliverables that are represented within each of the life cycle stages. So it's just it's an important kind of milestone check. Again, not a hard and fast. We in a previous webinar we had some questions about the design methods approach, and this is not so much to be prescriptive in saying one design method is better than another or one is preferred over another, but more so just to outline some stages within the project life cycle that we are looking to kind of these intermediate stages to kind of move you through as a guide. So where do we go from here? So it was a great effort. FRA was able to publish the capital project guidance earlier this year. But that's not the end of it, right? So we have this great guidance. What do we do next? So the first thing is we are encouraging project sponsors to go out and review the guidance, right? Become familiar with it, because how will FRA use it? Well, we're going to look to use the guidance to help inform both our application reviews and subsequent selection decisions as we are looking to the future fiscal year notice of funding opportunities. And then we also may require compliance with the guidance as part of grant agreements for funding those major capital projects or major projects as defined by the guidance. Again, this is designed to help projects fill gaps that we've seen historically that have led to cost overruns or schedule slippage or just stalling the project from getting to completion. So this last bullet here is more on FRA, and we are working as we speak to develop both internal and external training so that we as an agency can implement this guidance in a consistent manner, and so that we can provide you, the stakeholders, transparent kind of viewing of how we're going to use the guidance moving forward. So again, it's in development. When it becomes available, we will have the webinars posted to our website as we did this one, and encourage those interested in attending to do so. And hopefully it's helpful and ask questions so that we can implement the capital project guidance in a way that is leading to success. So from here, we're gonna pivot. I'm gonna throw it on over to Miriam, and she's gonna lead us through some, again, high-level overview of what a letters of intent and phase funding agreements are and by statute and what have you. So Miriam, to you.
Thank you, Ryan. Hello, everyone. My name is Miriam Ohamu from FRA's Grant and Loan Program Development Division, and I'll be presenting on a couple of new program tools, letters of intent, or LOIs, and phased funding agreements, or PFAs. So LOIs and PFAs, as Ryan mentioned earlier, are new features under the Fed-State Partnership, or FSP, program. Both the FSP NEC, Northeast Corridor, and FSP National programs make use of these new tools, but only under FSP. So I just wanted to clarify that. So FRA may issue letters of intent or phased funding agreements to FSP grantees proposing major capital projects. And again, as Ryan covered in his portion of the presentation, being a major capital project is a prerequisite to receiving one of these two program tools. And meeting those sort of dollar benchmarks that he mentioned as well. So applicants proposing major capital projects can, as part of their application, request an LOI or PFA. FRA also, though, may independently determine that a project is appropriate for an LOI or PFA. FRA is also authorized to make these tools available under 49 U.S. Code 24911, Section G. And A link to this is provided in the web links pod under Federal State Partnership Program Authorizing Law. If you are interested in reading up on it independently, you can do so. So first, I'll talk through the letter of intent, or LOI. As illustrated on this slide here, the LOI is confined to the project planning and project development lifecycle stages. The LOI is a letter from FRA to a grantee announcing an intention to obligate an amount to a major capital project from future budget authority. LOIs, as a key point, are not binding obligations. In issuing an LOI, FRA may outline conditions and/or define readiness thresholds that the applicant may use to inform future funding requests for FSP national funds. FRA, again, is eligible to use LOIs through 49 U.S. Code Section 24911G, which states that the Secretary may issue a letter of intent to a grantee under this section that announces an intention to obligate for a major capital project under this section an amount from future available budget authority specified in law that is not more than the amount stipulated as the financial participation of the Secretary in that project, and is subject to the availability of appropriations for grants under this section and subject to federal laws in force or enacted after the date of the contingent commitment. So I would say the two kind of main points about LOIs is that it's for the project planning and development phases of the project life cycle, and that they are non-binding obligations of future funding. Now, to contrast this a little bit, we have phased funding agreements, which are also known as PFAs. So a PFA is a grant agreement under the FSP program, again, that obligates funding from available funds and makes a contingent commitment to obligate future funds when and if they become available. In contrast to the earlier life cycle stages, PFAs focus on projects that are in final design and construction stages of the life cycle. FRA may enter into a PFA with an applicant who has a highly rated major capital project under the FSP program. And the PFA, sort of the key features of it, it establishes the terms of participation by the federal government in the project. It establishes the maximum amount of federal financial assistance for that project. It includes the period of time for completing the project, even if such period extends beyond the period for which federal financial assistance is authorized. And it makes timely and efficient management of the project easier in accordance with federal law. And again, just to reiterate the major capital project piece of the story here, those are defined as projects with a capital cost estimate equal to or greater than $500 million and at least $100 million in federal assistance. So for projects along the Northeast Corridor, funding for final design, construction, or construction stage activities on the NEC inventory that are scheduled to enter the final design or construction stages within the inventory regulatory period must provide an annualized budget in year of expenditure dollars, anticipated annual federal funding requests from this grant program, anticipated future non-federal match, and total project costs through the completion of the construction stage. FRA does require these elements to, in order to properly evaluate the project for a PFA. PFA applicants must include proposed milestones by which FRA can measure progress. Again, this applies to projects along the NEC, which is pictured here. There's also a link provided to the NEC inventory. I believe that's probably also in the web links pod for you to reference as appropriate. Okay, and finally, this slide describes the application review process and where in that process the PFA LOI evaluation fits in. As you can see, after screening, eligibility, and rating, FRA staff will review highly rated capital projects for an LOI PFA, LOI/PFA as appropriate. Afterwards, staff will recommend an initial selection of projects, and eventually FRA will announce selected awards under the FSP program. So that concludes my section of the presentation. I will hand it back over to Ryan to cover the next section.
Awesome. Thanks, Miriam. So now we're gonna pivot again back to we're gonna talk about the domestic sourcing plan, which is not a requirement of the Federal State Partnership for Inner City Passenger Rail NOFO. However, we are encouraging applicants who intend to seek a waiver for Buy America, Build America requirements to consider submitting the domestic sourcing plan either at time of application to help us kind of get a sense of the quantity of domestic sourcing within the project. So the domestic sourcing plan will be required at the time of obligation if selected, or prior to obligation, sorry. So we're just, to streamline this process as much as possible, we're encouraging applicants to kind of think about submitting the domestic sourcing plan at time of application. So the big question, what is the domestic sourcing plan? Well, all FRA programs require compliance with Build America, Buy America, and on our website, we have a link here, it kind of outlines some of the requirements for that. In general, the Buy America, Build America requirements are really focusing on projects need to use steel, iron construction materials, and manufactured goods that are produced in the United States. Certain technologies may not be available, and we recognize that there may be a need to waive or apply for a waiver for those technologies. However, to the extent possible, we are looking for applicants to demonstrate, based on the project's specifics of the project, how they are maximizing the use of domestic sourcing. So, we are considering Buy America requirements through all stages of the project. And if the project is seeking federal funds, then Buy America is applicable. So again, the domestic sourcing plan should include, to the extent possible, a detail of what the systems covered by the waiver are to be imported and to the extent to which such systems can be sourced domestically. If there is no market for those systems domestically, then we encourage applicants to highlight that and show how they are moving towards the implementation of that market within the United States and what their plan is to transition from imported products to domestically sourced products, recognizing that that market may take time to develop, but we are looking to see that the applicant is intending to not rely upon the Buy America, Build America waiver, and is looking to develop that domestic market for those products to the extent possible. So within the domestic sourcing plan, we also would encourage applicants to highlight how they're going to use maintenance and replacement facilities domestically so that we can transition from the need to import those portions of the project to domestic manufacturing. And then finally, an explanation of the number of domestic jobs, temporary and or permanent, that will be created by the project and outline how there is a transition, if needed, from foreign labor to local domestic labor. So this can include training, outlining how, maybe initially in the first year, the project is going to rely on foreign labor, or the first 6 months to rely on foreign labor to develop that knowledge base and then train a domestic labor so that they can take over the maintenance and replacement of the goods and the general operation on a domestic level. So the more information that an applicant can provide in the domestic sourcing plan helps FRA evaluate the extent to which the waiver, any waiver that would be needed can be developed so that FRA can look at a project-by-project basis to develop that sort of waiver of the Buy America, Build America requirements. Again, FRA expects that a project, to the extent possible, is being developed to maximize domestic sourcing and be compliant with the Buy America requirements. However, we understand that there may be a need for certain technologies or certain approaches to request a waiver, and therefore the waiver process is available. That process can be lengthy and take time. So to the extent possible, we are encouraging applicants to start putting forth those domestic sourcing plans and starting to consider the transition to domestic manufacturing as early as possible to help ensure that we are getting through that process as efficiently, as quickly as possible.
Thank you, Ryan. Thank you all for joining us today for the Federal State Partnership for Intercity Passenger Rail Grant Program Information Session, Major Capital Projects. A recording of today's information session will be available on FRA's website in the next week. The information session will end in 20 seconds. Please copy or screenshot the content information on the screen. Please note, we will email all web links to you after the event. This information session has ended. Thank you so much for joining us today.